Hi, Chloe. We're going to take a look at your aesthetics and control posting, get a look at what we have here, give you some feedback, and let's jump right into it. Share this. Just a little bit of a note. I've already done this video for you, except I neglected to screen share. So it was just me talking to the screen. So we didn't see any of your images. So we're going to go through it again. So if it sounds like I'm sort of, I know what I'm going to say, great. That it's actually true because I just spent some time going through your imagery. I'll say some different things though, because it always comes out different the second time. The first thing that I noticed is as going through all of your imagery, as we look at the overall posting to see that you have all of the components there, all of the all the exposures look quite right. What I noticed is that the overall color cast is quite warm. You've got the color calibrated and the color balance on the very warm side of the scale. So that's something that, maybe we could chat about, see what, what your thought process was there. Maybe you weren't thinking about that and just kind of an oversight. They are on the pretty warm side, almost on the too warm side. So we'll kind of chat about that in class a little bit, so I can get your thinking. And I know that, I know that you're aware of the color balance, because down here I can see you calibrated to a different lighting setting. So I know it's there. So anyway, let's jump back up to your, to hold. Now to hold, this is going to change your ability to hold the camera steady will change based on the focal length of the lens. In other words, the focal length of the lens has to do with how close things are brought to you from where you're standing. So, or in other words, it has to do with the angle in which the camera is capturing the imagery. So a 55 millimeter is going to capture a more narrow angle than a 35 millimeter, and an 80 will capture even more shallow of an angle. The illusion there is that the 80 millimeter is bringing it closer, which it kind of, that's what it's doing. So what happens is if you're shooting 55 and then you shoot 35, the difference between those will be that at 55, you might have a more difficult time holding the camera steady at certain shutter speeds versus one that's maybe 35, which is more wide open. You certainly would have more trouble holding a camera steady at 200 millimeter than you would at 55 millimeter. You just did 55 and 35, so we're not going to see a whole dramatic difference, but it's there. Now, it's expected that you can hold the camera steady at 125, and you are, that we can see. At 15th of a second, however, we're noticing something. The bones aren't moving, yet we are getting some shake. That's you. That we know that's totally you, because you're the only thing that could be moving. So we know that there's some trouble holding the camera steady at a 15th of a second for you, or at least in this scenario, you were having trouble holding the camera perfectly steady. There's nothing wrong with that. That's part of the experiment, to figure out just how we do it. So in this kind of situation, that a 15th of a second, if you wanted everything crystal sharp, you couldn't do that. You would have to either have the camera on a tripod or brighter light or whatnot to be able to have a faster shutter speed so that you could capture perfectly crisp images without shake. Or you'd have to go on the other side, and that is incorporate a little bit of the movement as an aesthetic, which is what ends up happening when we get to the half a second. No one's going to hold the camera perfectly steady at a half a second. And what you get here is this illusion. You're going to have rendered objects in a half a second. It's not as if it's going to be completely blurry. You could make it completely blurry if you deliberately started moving the camera around, whipping it around really fast. But in this case, if you're holding the camera steady and then you're just sort of subtly moving it, you'll have things that are sort of rendered out. I think in your other one down here, you have a little bit more rendering in maybe, let's see, one here. it's a little bit more rendered out. You can see the bones. You could see that they're still bones. However, there's an energy to them, and that's coming from the movement. There. Now, I mean, there's an application for this. This isn't just a sort of a experimental trick. This has application. So, you know, if you were at an event and there was some exciting things happening, and you wanted to capture the energy of these people moving around, like a concert or some sort of wedding that people were excited and people jumping around or whatever. You could use this technique to capture some images. You wouldn't want to just use this technique, but you could use this technique to capture some images, and that would portray that kind of energy, and it would be unique. Now, it's hit or miss sometimes when you do these kinds of things, because you wouldn't know exactly what you're going to get. The more you do it, the more you can anticipate and the better you get at it. But anyway, this is a technique that you could incorporate and use along with other sort of aesthetic techniques using shutter speed. So, but again, it looks like you've got a pretty good handle in terms of just being able to control shutter speed, where the function is, and so on. That's really what we're exploring here. Now, with how deep, again, what we're really looking for is pretty much the same image, just with a various depth of field, various apertures, which will produce a different depth of field each way. So you start at 5.6, and then we go to 8, we go to 11, we go to 16, and we go to 22. Now you can see 16 to 22 didn't produce that much of a difference. I'm not exactly sure why. I mean, we did get a bit of difference. You can see in the foreground between 16, which is this, and 22, which is this, that foreground image, you got a little bit more. But again, we could talk about depth of field and talk about it and talk about it, but until you've actually worked with it, until you've done an experiment sort of like this to visually capture the phenomenon, sometimes it's hard to really visualize, to know what it is. Now, with some of the portraiture that you've done, I've seen you do like portraiture of people on location and stuff. You seem to be using maybe a longer lens, a lens that you're standing kind of far away, and the model's a little bit farther away from you, and they maybe are in a field, or maybe they're in a location, and you're incorporating something kind of like this. I don't know how shallow of a depth of field you're incorporating, but my advice to you would be to use a very shallow depth of field in that kind of situation, so that the foreground, whatever's in the foreground, flowers or whatnot, and the background, trees or whatever, are out of focus, and the middle space, which should be the person, and in this case here, the bones in middle, but the middle is in focus. So you can capture that person in perfect focus, and now all the other space kind of melts away. You'll highlight the person, unless you're very deliberately attempting to show everything else. You would want to use that very shallow depth of field. Again, we're very warm on these images. Again, I'm not sure why we pushed it so warm. It seems like a little bit over the top, almost like an error. If it was a little less warm, I might think you were just sort of making an aesthetic choice, but they almost seem a little bit like you forgot to color calibrate. So this may have been a result of your losing all your images, and you had to do them really quick, and that was just something that you neglected to do. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm glad you got your posting done and all of that. But we'll talk about it. We'll figure out what happened there. Now we get into the equivalent exposures, which is really just you getting to know the ratios and the sort of relationship, that's the word I was looking for, relationship between the aperture, the shutter speed, and even, yes, the ISO. So we move the aperture one direction, more intensity. We move the shutter speed the other way, shorter time. The more intense the light is, the less time we need to expose. The less intense the light, the more time we need to expose. It's a pretty simple concept to understand when you put it in those terms. And then you're just applying it here. This is, when we talk about it, it sounds very complex. We're going to do this equivalent exposures, and we're going to set manual exposure. It sounds very daunting, but in reality, after everybody's done it, it's actually a pretty straightforward and simple experiment. You can do it very quickly. And once you've done it once, you've done it twice, which is what I have you guys do. there's nothing to it really. You just kind of like, oh, okay. Particularly because you have the advantage of digital technology, because you have instant feedback as to whether you're doing it correctly. If the exposure looks too bright, you know you went the wrong direction. So, this part of it is really just, did you get it's just a math problem, and did you get the answer right? This isn't so much of an aesthetic issue as it is more, I gave you a little math puzzle, go this way a couple and go the other way a couple. If you got it right, you got it right. Now, the compositions here, I think you probably could have gotten a little bit more creative with them, a little bit more bold with them. Again, I understand you may have been a little flustered because you had to redo a bunch of stuff because you lost those images. I feel for you there. It's unfortunate, and I hope that doesn't happen to you again. I'm glad you got the posting in. You did recover. You got all the stuff in, so I'm glad and proud of you for doing that. So I'm looking here at your better, and as I mentioned when we were putting this together, this is really going to be all about you demonstrating, okay, so I know about lighting, I know about camera control, what can you work with? I think you're doing an excellent job here playing around with the lighting. You're not doing something that looks very typical. You're doing a much better job of the composition on these. You're using the entire picture plane. Shallow depth of field is being incorporated on these. It's very good. I'm seeing a little bit more character in terms of how you're arranging things. Definitely a much better series here than in some of the more experimenting ones, which you just kind of got things clumped in the middle of the table. That said, I mean, I'm not terribly concerned about the compositions on the other ones. I mean, I would like them to be always you're concerned with composition, but I'm glad that you picked it up a little bit on these to do a little bit more of a dynamic composition on there. Your photography deserves beautiful images every time you pick it up. This project is a lot less about the sort of the subtleties. It's really, did you do it right or did you do it wrong? This camera control stuff, we're using the aesthetics or the visual consequence of camera control to understand camera control, but the experiments are really just about camera control. They're really just about, do you understand, is it evident that you know how to manipulate the shutter speed and that you're seeming to understand what the consequences of it? Are you able to manipulate the aperture? Are you able to do equivalent exposures and things like this to get to know your camera so you have those controls? Now, in this project we're working on now, you're outside, you're going to have to take advantage of all that stuff to be able to make effective images, because as you can see here, we have stuff like this where you're going to have to make some choices on where you're positioned and how you're going to make images. So that's what I have for you. I think you did an excellent job. Congratulations for recovering after the lost images. I'm sorry that happened to you, but you made it happen. So good job on that. And we'll see you back in the studio and see your images from the location stuff. All right. Bye-bye now.